Welcome back to the Start to Finish course on upgrading to .NET Core. We are currently in the module focused on refactoring our application to use some of the new features from .NET Core that we just added in. And in this lesson, we're going to be covering utilizing the dependency injection system. So let's get right back to Visual Studio, and we're going to pick up right where we left off, where we have basically a broken application at this point. And the reason why is because we didn't have dependency injection already baked in. And so this application decided that we needed some type of dependency injection-like system, but just for a very simple piece. And that is for which version of the database access do we use? Is it the SQL connector or the text connector? And right now, a text connector doesn't have a constructor that takes 0 arguments. Instead, it passes in that iLogger. So how are we going to deal with this? And there's a couple ways of going about this. We could rip apart our application and replace the use of this global config with something else, or even just take out this section right here, because what happens is depending on which one you use, it puts that value into the connection property. And that connection property is an iData connection. So it's either one, they both implement iData connection. And then from then on, we read connection as this property, and then we use that particular class, whether it's SQL connector or text connector. Notice that 34 places look at this connection. And if we look at the overall class, there's 84 references to this class. So this is a pretty integral class, and just making this overall major change might not be the best solution. I think the long-term goal here will be to eliminate the need for this and just ask the dependency injection system to give us the type that is currently loaded. It will only load one of them. So we'll load either the SQL connector or the text connector. But I think that's down the road. If you notice, this only has, it's a little small, but this only has 3 references to the initialized connection. And those 3 references are in startup of MVC, in startup of the WinForm, and startup for the WPF project. So there's only 3 places that this gets changed or called. Therefore, I think what we're going to do is rework this call into something that is a little easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a public, if I can spell, public static void initialize connections. But instead of passing in a database type, we're going to pass in an iData connection type. And we're going to just say that connection equals DB. So instead of saying what type, and that's an enum, and then based upon that enum, instantiating it and assigning it, we're just going to take in the instantiated iData connection, and we're going to assign that to our property. Now, long term, we want to remove this step, but this is an intermediate step. And that's one of the things you'll have to do during refactoring is create some intermediate steps. Hopefully there's not too many, and hopefully that they're not really in depth. In this case, it's just one method change. Now I have 3 references here, I have no references here. I'm going to change the 3 references over to use this, and once I do, I'll eliminate this method. So let's get to work. I'm going to go to my references, and let's track down the MVC startup. And this is an illustration of the wrong way for dependencies to go. Instead of dependencies coming from the top down, we are getting dependencies from the bottom up. And that's not great. So we're going to change that over. So instead of doing this, what we're going to do is we're going to initialize it with our correct version. Now, this might not be the place to put this call, I'm going to look at program.cs and see if maybe what we should do is split this apart and after the build, grab this host object and then use that to grab the correct instance out of our dependency injection system. I think that's probably the way I'll go, but let's first look at our dependency injection system, because right now for services, we're just adding the controllers with views. But I'm going to do services.add, and it's probably add transient. I'm going to say that I want an iData, and I forget the forget what it is. It's iData connection. So iData connection, control dot there to add the using statement, and I want this to be, and here's my choice. I can do a text connection or a SQL connection. So I'll do a text connector for now. And then we can figure out if we want to do an if else statement here, or if we just want to say, you know what, we'd already hard coded in the code which one to choose. This is our hard coding now instead of that hard coding right. No, it's actually up above, right there. So we hard code it here using a enum, but instead we could do is hard code it here with a adding it to the dependency injection system. So if we wanted to add the other one, we change this text connector to the SQL connector. I think I'm comfortable with that for now. Long term, I want to do something different here, but I think that works for now. So next what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our program.cs. We're going to break this apart into two calls. So var host equals, and then we're going to say down here host.run. And that way what I can say is global config control dot initialize connections, and we're going to pass in, instead of using this version, we're going to pass in the correct iData connection. So I'm going to say host.services.get service of type iData connection, control dot there, and that doesn't seem to have that probably extension method. If we go look at the WinForms project, and we look at how it does the get service, we ask for the type. So my guess is this is an extension method. It is, and it's probably coming from the Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. If we look at the dependencies here, if we just go to manage NuGet packages and see what's installed, my guess is the dependency injection system is not installed. And for some reason I have a loading bar on this. It's not showing me what's installed, but no worries. I can go here and I can look, and there seems to be nothing installed for my MVC NuGet packages. Let's go to browse, and let's select Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. And I'll install that for Preview 8, which is the one I'm using. And now, if we come back over here and do a control dot here, it's still not showing it. But if I do a using Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection, that brings it in for me. So a little bit of tweaking there, but this way what I've done now is I initialize a connection by passing in the correct instance from my dependency injection system. The reason I did it in two steps, instead of just saying right here equals new text or equals new SQL, is because I wanted it in my dependency injection system so I can slowly start breaking the tie on reading the value from this property. If you can see, there's 34 references to this property. But since I will now have this property updated correctly from the dependency injection system, I won't have to change all 34 of these references. But as I have time, I can change them one by one to instead rely on the dependency injection system. Eventually, this property will go away. But until then, I can use this and the dependency injection system and get the same instance or the same class. It'll be a different instance because I made it transient, which is okay because this SQL connector doesn't actually hold information long term. At least I don't think it does. If it did, I can make it a singleton. Okay, so now I've added as a transient, and I've broken this call apart into two so that I could initialize a connection. So now we've taken one of our calls to that class out of the loop. All right, let's go back to our global config. It still says 3 references, but it just hasn't updated yet because we haven't done a build. Let's go to the next one, tracker UI. And here's where we initialize this. We need to do a similar thing here where we add it to the dependency injection system and then we insert it here. The good news is we already have this ready for us. So we can just copy this, paste it in, and we'll just modify to say instead the iData connection, I believe it is. Control dot, let's see. Yes, iData connection. All right, so now we have that, but we still need to add our iData connection into the dependency injection system. So we need to go down where our services are declared, right here, and we need to add a service for that. Services.add transient for the iData connection. Whoops. Didn't have it in clipboard. iData connection. And that's going to be a text data connection, I believe. Let's find out. It is text connector. There we go. And so now I've added that to our dependency injection system. Okay, so that is the WinForm project. Let's go back to global config. And one more time for the WPF project. And you may ask yourself, Tim, it seems like you're repeating code a lot. And doesn't Dry say don't repeat yourself? And shouldn't we be doing this a different way? Well, yes, we're repeating ourselves, but we're repeating ourselves because we have 3 different user interfaces. And we really don't want to pass this into the user interface and let the or down to the library and let the library decide. The user interface has to decide which type of connection it wants. That doesn't mean there isn't room for refactoring here, because there really is. We need to refactor this so that we have a less code in our user interface than we even do now. So there's room for improvement for sure. Okay, so this is right now in the shell view model is where we're doing the initialize for the connection. That's probably not the right place to do that. But in the shell view model, we also have dependency injection system already working. So we can say iData connector control dot. I spelled it wrong, but again, Visual Studio is awesome. iData connection, is that what you want? Yeah, that's what I want. And go ahead and add that using statement as well. And we'll just say DB. And now we have a dual value here. Not only do we have this being passed in to initialize our connection, which we'll do right here, but also we now have access to this for the rest of this class. So if we need to do anything with the database, which I don't think we do, but if we did, we'd have access to this class. All right, so with that being done, I believe we have no more references to this. We can comment that out. We can save everything and we can do a build. And this is a build for the entire solution. Let's see if it actually will build fully. It does. So I think that we're up and running. We're going to find out by starting one of our user interfaces. We already have WPF highlighted, so let's go ahead and do that. So we'll start this. I also deleted all of the files here, the log files. So if we have any logging issues, we can capture those. Oh, and I forgot one thing. And this just highlighted. Unable to resolve service for type iData connection. So in my WPF application, I forgot to add a service for it. So up here, my services, I need to add another service. And let's go just grab it from somewhere else. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel here. So I'm going to copy this. Right now, they're all using a text connector. They don't have to, but they all are. And I control dot here to add my using statements. And now if we boot this again, it should work. And let's bring back up the log files. There's our log files. And right now, we have a log for, this is Caliber Micro finally working finally. And we have getting all the tournaments. So it's loaded the tournaments and then it captured, hey, I'm getting all the tournaments. So let's do this. Let's load a tournament. Let's close this out. We just loaded a tournament and let's look at the rounds, unplayed only. For round 1, nobody's unplayed, but for round 2, let's go ahead and mark Mary's team as the winner and hit score and see what happens. So it's thinking right now. It's kind of locked up. So we're not quite sure what's going on or why, but we have an error. We have an exception, Stack Overflow exception. So there's an issue looking up the keys, which is actually not. It's probably somewhere else in here that we have an issue. But if we go over to our log files, let's look and see if we've captured any more logs, and we have. And so we just found a bug in our code, and we know where to start looking. Because when you call the completing a tournament, it seems like it calls completing a tournament again somewhere. And that calls it again and again. So we keep accessing this data over and over and over again, meaning we're calling it from somewhere over and over and over again. So that weird completion bug that we've had a problem with, that's the issue right here. Is it keeps calling the completion over and over again. My guess is that because something's not configured, we have a silent exception being thrown, meaning we have a try catch, but the catch has no exception being logged or shown. And so what's happening is it's coming back and it's saying, okay, you're not done. Let's go ahead and complete you again. It's stuck in a loop. But that just told us that, which is pretty awesome. So now our logging's working, and we have our dependency injection system working for at least that SQL data access. So now let's do some cleanup here. Let's get rid of this method that's no longer needed. And let's look at where else can we start adding in dependency injection. Now it would be tempting to put more dependency injection into our tournament tracker library. But doing so means that we have to make sure that we're not doing like we probably do here. Let's go to the dashboard here, where we say things like, give me a new form. So right there, boom, new form. So doing this is going to cause a problem because we're not going to pass in dependency injection into this form, which means that anything that then this form needs or responds to is going to need dependency injection, and so there's going to be a missing piece there somewhere. So let's start on our win forms and start asking for forms through dependency injection. I'm going to start by closing everything else out, and I believe that this form itself is being called with dependency injection. So yeah, so we're saying get service, the tournament dashboard form. So that one's in place. But the rest I don't believe are. So we just have just that form. So now this form needs two forms, a create tournament form and it needs a load tournament form. Now the tricky bit here is that this button can be clicked more than once, meaning we're going to have to create more than one new instance of this form. The same thing for this load tournament button. This can be clicked multiple times. So again, we're going to need multiple of these. How many? We don't know. Could be 1, could be 0, could be 100. So we can't just say pass in a tournament viewer form and pass in a create tournament form. At least not with this current design. So we're going to do something that normally or ideally you wouldn't do. So in the ideal world, you would not do this, but in this case, it makes sense. So I'm going to ask for an iService provider. And what this does is this is kind of like dependency injection, the whole container. And so I'm going to ask for this container. I'm going to call it provider. Let's call it container. Be even clearer. Control dot to create my field. And now here, what I can do is instead of saying create tournament FRM equals new, this equals new goes away. And instead I'm going to say container dot get service, and it's going to have type, and I'm going to say the type is create tournament form, like so. And again, we have to add in our extension method for this, which it doesn't see, so we're going to have to say using Microsoft.extensions.dependent. And then we'll do that one more time, but this is for the tournament viewer form. Now that does mean we're going to essentially add all these forms in, so we'll probably just do that right now. But there is an easier way, especially if you have more than the, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 forms that I have. The easier way is what we do in the WPF project already. So if we go look there real quick just to see what's going on, it's not there. It's in Bootstrapper. Okay. So right here, nope, it's not there. Where is it? Ah, you know what? I don't think I added to this project yet. So there is a way, and I'll pull the code up in a little bit, but essentially what you can do is use some reflection to look through all the classes in your user interface and say, I want you to look for everything that ends with the name form. And I want you to add that directly to dependency injection. It's going to loop through and add all of those. That makes your life a little easier. So if you have a naming convention that would allow for that, then it makes it quite easy to add all your forms to your dependency injection system. The other way of doing this is to just spend the time and type them all in. Or if you have the benefit of having an intern, have the intern do it. This is a good learning experience. You can try and convince yourself or someone else of that. It's not really a good learning experience. It's just a good wasting time, but that's okay. Okay, create prize form, and this is going to be create team form. So now I have Let's go through the list. Create prize form, got that. Create team form, got that. Create tournament form, that's this right here. The tournament dashboard form, that's this right here. And finally, the tournament viewer form is right there. So we've added all of our forms to dependency injection. We don't have to add any more. So now I'm going to start asking for them in different places. So right now I've asked for it in the tournament dashboard form. Go down now and figure out how to get rid of anything else in here that we need. So you already have this being called with dependency injection. So now we'll have this. That's okay to ask for that. But let's look for anything that says equals new. So far, I don't see anything that says equals new. It looks like so far that this is all clean. I'm scrolling kind of fast. Oop, there we go. Nope, that's pulling it from the selected item, so that's still okay. And it looks like this is completely empty of things we need to change. The one exception is this new binding list, but that's not something we really need to add in a dependency injection. And the same with this new binding right here. Those two don't need to be added in dependency injection. So let's go to that create tournament form, because that one calls this form. So we know that has an equals new. So we have no references to create tournament form because we're only calling it from that one place. So we can now say ilogger control dot add the using statement and say of type create tournament form. I remember this time. Log control dot add and initialize a field. You don't have to have this right here. I'll leave it because why not? All right, let's come down here and look for our equals new. And it's right here on the create prize button. Again, we can click this create prize button more than once. So I'm going to follow the same pattern as here and ask for an iService provider. And now I'm going to control dot here and initialize that field. So that down here, when I say equals new, we could get complicated here because notice that it takes in a parameter, which is the create tournament form. And it's going to use that, let's just do an F12 here. It's going to use that as the caller so it knows who to call back to when it finally does the completion of this. So that prize completion is going to say, caller, go ahead and run this method prize complete and pass the model in. So that's the issue we're facing. I think what we're going to do is rework how this form works, because if you can get away with it, this is a whole lot simpler. So instead of having this constructor pass in a value, we're going to do an empty constructor with initialize component. And then we'll have another method, because we know that this is a known class. See, the caller is an unknown class. It could be one of a few different forms. And so we're passing an interface so we know that it at least has one method, and that method is prize complete. And that's fine, but the person who's calling the prize form, the create prize form, knows it's calling the create prize form, not some prize form. So therefore, we can create a public method here. Public void specify requester. And is requester ER or OR? I think it's OR. But I'm going to leave it because that's what this is as well. We probably should refactor it at some point. Looks like a spelling mistake there. But I'm going to pass this in like so, and then I'm going to do this assignment here. Now I can get rid of this constructor and just know I have to make this call. And that does make it a little bit less ideal because the constructor forces you to pass in that value. But with this, we are requesting that you tell us who you are. So it does make for a little bit more difficulty possibly. But now what we can do is we can take this out of here and say frm dot specify requester. That's what it was, frm. And now you've broken into two parts just like before. Now we can do the same thing here where we say underscore container dot get service. We don't have a type here, so create prize form. We don't have the extension method, I mean. So we need to come up here and say using Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. And we're not passing FRM in, we're passing this in. My mistake. So now we have used dependency injection for this. Let's come on down and see if there's any more that we need to do. I'm going to copy this first. And there's this one right here. Same basic principle where we need to change it so it's not dependent. Methods, the constructor and the specify requester. So with that, we can now come over here, do this, and then do frm.specify requester this. And now from here, we can do the paste. Actually, you don't have right away, so it's right there on my clipboard. There we go. And now we are properly getting the form from the container. Come on down here, we have no more yet. Oh, right there, tournament model. That one's easy. And this is tournament model. And tournament viewer form. And there we go. So now we've added dependency injection. There's a spot for logging. We should probably stick in at some point. Anytime you have a message box showing to the user, also log it. Coming down here, looks like that is all good. Again, we can add the iLogger for this one. The control dot really makes your life easier. It makes your calls a whole lot faster. Let's scroll through here and see if we have any equals new. We do for the person model. And people often get caught up in this and say, well, how do I do that with my dependency injection system? And you don't. There's not really a need for person to be in your dependency injection system, especially not when you might do it more than once. For models where it's just the properties, there's no reason to mock them, to replace them with a different version of that same model. Dependency injection systems really allow you to not have to depend on a certain processor or a certain system. So, for example, our SQL data access versus text files, you can swap that out very easily. You can also take that out of the loop entirely, either one of them, and replace it with a third one, which is really useful for testing, where we say we don't want to actually write to a text file or database, but let's call this delete method and see if it gets called. Okay, so there's reasons why we replace things that have some type of processing in place. The place where I would have a need to get a model from a dependency injection system is where I have logic in that model that I need to replace with different logic or replace with pretend logic for our mocking system so that we can then do unit testing. But that gets messy. And so we don't want to do that because, for example, if I use Dapper, well, Dapper takes in a model and returns back a list of that model. Now I've got a hard dependency on that model and that logic. So that's why I try to mix logic and models. Models really should be just for holding data. All right, enough of a soapbox. Let's keep moving. There's another great place for a log statement. Let's keep going down here. I don't see equals new team model. Again, that's a model. The word model in the end helps you identify that that's okay. All right, now I can go over to here, and we're already asking for an iLogger. That's good. And I think we've taken care of all of our news here. We have no references now to this interface. Notice the 0 references, or to this constructor. So therefore, we can get rid of it. I think that we've gone through the major parts of the user interface for the WinForm project. So let's set it as a startup project. Let's do a build first. Make sure it does build. If we've missed anything or forgotten anything, this will tell us, hopefully. Build succeeded, so let's run this and see if we can run and load up our text files. And it appears that we can. Not only that, it appears we have some logging going on. We have getting all the tournaments. Cool. So let's do this. Let's create a tournament, which that should have triggered yet another call. It did, getting all the teams. So I'm going to create a new team, and I'm going to create a new member. So this member is going to be Bilbo Baggins. Email is bilbo@middleearth.net, and a cell phone is fine. Create member. And the team name is The Hobbits. Just one member. Create the team. So now our logging has getting all the people, creating a person. There's the person model. But if we're not logging a text file, we can actually pull that out and have more value in there than just the name, We should change that to be a little bit different, but that's okay. Creating team as well. Okay, and now we can add, let's add some more teams. So we have 4 teams, there's no buys. Let's create a prize, and we're going to mess this up. The prize number is first, and the place is first place. And the prize amount is 5. Create prize, and it says the format's invalid information. Please check it and try again. We go to our log file here. We have no logging of that. So that was only in the WPF project. So that's something we need to add in here as well. But now we have a prize. We hit create tournament. And it seems to have gone away. Interestingly enough, it crashed the application. And look at this. There's a major problem that crashed the application. Null reference exception. Object not set to an instance of an object. Okay, so when we clicked on that, we got this major issue, and it gives us the entire stack trace and the message so we know what's going on. So let's start investigating this. We'll pull this off to the side, pull this down, and let's look through. Let's start at the Tracker UI program.cs line 43. That's where it actually threw the exception. Okay, and that's where it was running this. So that's obviously not where the actual issue was. But at the very top, it said on the create tournament form. So create tournament form. On the create tournament button, click. So create tournament. Let's look for it here in our list. Create tournament button, click. There's an object not set to an instance of an object. Well, look at this. In my haste, I added I said, oh, that's a new, and replaced it. But it's a model, and we're not putting the models in a dependency injection system. So this really should be a new tournament model. So not only did it catch that, and not only did it crash our application, but because I didn't have any kind of try-catch around this, but our log file helped us, because our log file said, null reference exception, object reference not set to an instance of an object. If you haven't learned by now, that's a really key phrase. If you hear that phrase, it means you haven't created an instance of some object. So whenever you see that, just think, where did I not do equals new instance? Now in our case, we were asking for it from the dependency injection system, but it wasn't there. But where did that happen? It happened right here. In this method, oh, by the way, it's on line 135. We look at line 135. That is this line right here, which just so happens to be the line that was right below the issue. Okay, so it tried to use TM, and it says, that's not a valid instance. Well, right up above is where we instantiate that, and oops, we didn't instantiate it properly. So logging, huge benefit. That's done. But the WPF project still needs work. And so does the MVC project. And then once all those are done, then you can add dependency injection even into your tracker library and make sure that it's not newing up instances anywhere. But this gives you some experience and practice doing what you've just watched. And it allows you to make those decisions for a real world type application, not just some tutorial that's all neat and clean and doesn't have either the end of this course or after right now. Go ahead and do those replacements, but then come on back for replacing the app.config file.